Two people are in custody in connection to the case of 26-year-old Hannah Neville, the woman who was 32 weeks pregnant and missing out of Stromsburg, and her husband, who was reported missing shortly after she was.
Police say they are both likely dead just days after being reported missing, but there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Mainly, where are they? Police have yet to locate their bodies or a murder weapon. Lincoln husband and wife have since been arrested. In a missing persons case, it's now turned into a homicide investigation. For nearly 3 weeks, Hannah Neville and Roberto Tanner's phones went straight to voicemail. Now, police know why.
We are heartbroken for their families, and our deepest condolences go out to their loved ones.
The winter air in Stromsburg, Nebraska, on January 15, 2026, carried the quiet stillness of a typical Midwestern evening. But for 26-year-old Hannah Neville, the day was defined by anticipation and routine. Hannah was 32 weeks pregnant, a time usually reserved for final preparations and nesting. Instead, she climbed into her SUV to make the drive to Lincoln, a trip intended to reunite her with her 27-year-old husband, Roberto Tanner. There was no indication as she navigated the highway that this journey would be her last, nor that the digital trail she left behind would eventually become the primary roadmap for a double homicide investigation. By 7 p.m. that evening, digital forensics placed Hannah and Roberto at an apartment in Lincoln. This wasn't a random location. It was the residence of Roberto's half-brother, Sterling James, and his new wife, Sadie Titus. The couple had only been married a short time, operating under the glow of being newlyweds. For Hannah and Roberto, the visit was likely seen as a standard family interaction. However, within the walls of that apartment, the timeline of their lives reached a sudden and violent deviation. As the hour passed, the digital heartbeat of their mobile devices provided the first clues of something gone terribly wrong. The phones did not simply go silent. They began a journey that defied the couple's known plans, moving away from the apartment to a secondary location on Northwest 27th Street. While the families remained unaware of any danger, the first physical evidence of a crime appeared just hours later. Shortly after midnight on January 16th, Lincoln Emergency Services responded to reports of a vehicle engulfed in flames.
Another key piece of this investigation, Hannah's car, which was found lit on fire near 39th and Cornhusker on January 16th.
Officers called Hannah that morning to advise her of the fire, but her phone number was no longer in service. We now believe that was because she was likely already deceased at the time.
When they arrived, they found a scorched SUV abandoned in a desolate area. At that moment, the fire was treated as an isolated incident of arson or a stolen vehicle dump. There was no immediate link between the smoldering wreckage and the pregnant woman from Stromsburg. The disconnect between the burning car and the missing couple would persist for nearly 2 weeks, a gap in time that allowed the trail to grow cold and gave the perpetrators a window to obscure their tracks. The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah Neville was not someone who vanished by choice. Her medical needs, given her advanced pregnancy, required regular check-ins and appointments. When she failed to show up for these critical visits, and when her roommate in Stromsburg realized that neither Hannah nor Roberto had returned or made contact, the atmosphere shifted from concern to dread.
Just last week, 1011 spoke with Jessica Alexander, who was brought to tears when talking about her best friend. She describes Hannah as a free spirit, a soon-to-be mother, who police say was killed by someone in her own family.
It's really scary. I've hardly been able to sleep last night because all I can think about is her and her daughter. So.
On January 28th, 13 days after the drive to Lincoln, a formal missing persons report was filed. The Lincoln Police Department was thrust into a race against time, though they were already starting nearly a fortnight behind. Investigators began the grueling process of reconstructing the couple's final known movements. They pivoted back to the morning of January 16th, realizing that the SUV found torched in Lincoln was in fact registered to Hannah Neville. The discovery transformed a missing persons case into a potential recovery operation. The arson was no longer a random act of vandalism. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy forensic evidence. With the vehicle accounted for, the focus shifted to the last people known to have seen them alive, Sterling James and Sadie Titus. The investigation moved into the digital realm, where pings from Hannah's cell phone painted a haunting picture. The data confirmed that after the 7 p.m. meeting at the suspect's apartment, the phone moved to a private residence on Northwest 27th Street. It remained there for 4.5 hours, a duration that suggested a significant event had occurred at that secondary location. By the time the phone finally went offline, investigators believed the couple was already incapacitated or deceased. This secondary location became the epicenter of the police's interest, leading them to execute a series of search warrants that would ultimately break the case open. As detectives swarmed the Northwest 27th Street property, they began interviewing anyone associated with the residence. They were looking for more than just physical evidence. They were looking for a crack in the story Sterling and Sadie likely prepared. The pressure of a double homicide investigation, compounded by the disappearance of a heavily pregnant woman, created a sense of urgency that resonated through the precinct. They weren't just looking for Hannah and Roberto. They were looking for an unborn child who had never been given the chance to draw a first breath. The procedural work was meticulous. Police analyzed the relationship between Roberto and his half-brother, searching for a motive that could lead a family member to commit such an unthinkable act. There were no public records of a long-standing feud or a violent history that would explain a targeted execution. Yet the evidence continued to point towards the newlyweds. The contrast was stark. One couple preparing to bring life into the world, and another, recently married, allegedly conspiring to end it. When the search warrants were served, the biological and digital evidence began to coalesce. Neighbors and witnesses were questioned about any unusual activity on the night of the 15th and the early morning of the 16th. While the suspects remained at large in the initial phase of the search, the weight of the investigation was narrowing their world around them. Every forensic hit from the torched vehicle and every data point from the cell tower pings brought the Lincoln Police Department closer to the apartment where the nightmare began.
With this admission, the suspects maintained a final cruel leverage over the situation. They would not disclose where the bodies had been hidden. On February 1, 2026, the investigation culminated in a high-stakes tactical operation. Police descended on the home of Sterling James and Sadie Titus, taking both into custody without incident. The charges reflected the gravity of the state's findings. Sterling James was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, while his wife, Sadie Titus, was charged with aiding and abetting first-degree murder. For the Lincoln Police Department, the victory was a hollow one. The no-body nature of the case loomed large. A confession is a powerful tool for a prosecutor, but without the physical remains of the victims, the narrative remains incomplete, and the families are left in a state of perpetual, agonizing limbo. The legal hurdles of a no-body prosecution are significant but not impossible to overcome. Forensic experts and veteran homicide detectives point to the digital trail as the silent witness that can bridge the gap in the absence of a murder weapon, which also remains missing. The prosecution must rely on the movement of the victim's phones, the arson of the SUV, and the biological evidence recovered from the secondary search sites. The motive, however, remains the most elusive piece of the puzzle. Even in his alleged confession, Sterling James reportedly offered no explanation for the violence. There was no mention of a debt, a grudge, or a moment of spontaneous rage. This lack of the why makes the crime feel all the more predatory and senseless. The focus of the investigation has now shifted entirely to recovery. Search teams have been tasked with combing through areas identified by cell tower data, looking for any sign of disturbed earth or discarded evidence. The logistics are grueling. Nebraska's winter landscape offers plenty of places to hide a crime, and the 2-week head start that was given to the suspects by the delayed missing persons report has made the physical search a daunting endeavor. Every day that passes without the recovery of Hannah and Roberto is a day that the defense can use to sow seeds of doubt, despite the weight of the digital evidence and the reported admissions. As the case moves toward the courtroom, the community of Stromsburg and the wider Lincoln area are left to grapple with the horror of the details. The loss of a young couple is tragic enough, but the death of an unborn child adds a layer of complexity to the legal and emotional landscape. In many jurisdictions, the death of a fetus at 32 weeks can carry its own set of charges, further increasing the stakes for Sterling James and Sadie Titus. The newlyweds who should have been beginning their lives together now face a future defined by life sentences or worse. The story of Hannah Neville and Roberto Tanner is a stark reminder of how quickly a family gathering can turn into a crime scene. It highlights the terrifying reality that danger doesn't always come from a stranger in the shadows. Sometimes it sits across the table from you, sharing a name and a history. The arson, the cross-city movements, and the silence of the suspects all point to a calculated effort to erase 3 lives from existence. But in the modern age, total erasure is nearly impossible. The digital breadcrumbs left behind on that cold January night have ensured that while the bodies may be hidden, the truth is slowly being brought into the light. The legal battle ahead will likely be defined by the tension between the suspect's silence and the mountain of circumstantial evidence. Prosecutors will have to build a narrative that convinces a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that a murder occurred, even if the victims are never found. They will point to the torched SUV as an admission of guilt in itself, an act of destruction that serves no purpose other than to hide a crime. They will point to the cell phone pings that show a path to a house where the suspects were present and where the victims' phones eventually died. For the families, justice is a twofold requirement. They seek the legal conviction of those responsible, but more importantly, they seek the return of their loved ones. The falling action of this story is a slow, methodical crawl through the legal system and the Nebraska wilderness. Until Hannah and Roberto are brought home, the arc of this tragedy remains jagged and unfinished. The silence of Sterling James regarding the location of the bodies remains the final act of violence in a story that began with a simple drive to Lincoln and ended in a nightmare that has captivated and horrified the state. As the pre-trial motions begin and the evidence is cataloged, the case of the Lincoln newlyweds stands as a haunting example of the darkness that can exist within a family tree. The investigation continues, the searches persist, and the legal system prepares to adjudicate a crime that is as baffling as it is brutal.